else too. A couple housekeeping things. You will get a recording. I know a lot of folks say, you know, hey, are we going to get a recording of this? Yes, we'll send. It usually takes us about 72 hours. Hopefully, sometime this week, we'll get you out a copy of the webinar. My colleague, Daria, is on here, and I'll give her a little bit of kudos. She is doing some amazing writing. She just wrote in her series for Trade Show News Network and Corporate News Network, the 10 new words you shouldn't be using in the event industry. She writes a lot of our content. She is here to help the two of us get through things, and I'm going to cover some of her research here too. So I wanted to say hi to her. I find that don't panic if you start to have issues. A lot of times it's logging in and logging back on, or feel free to message us or Q&A. If you're having issues, we can try to help you diagnose that. But generally, sometimes it's just logging in and logging back in. So 2 ways to chat with us. One is the Q&A if you want to sort of message us directly. I'll try to sprinkle those in a little bit today, and we're actually going to leave some time because we got so many questions submitted in advance. I want to leave us some time at the end to cover those questions and really your questions. So, and the chat really is designed to chat. I love the conversation. So if we're hitting on things or you're seeing differences or you disagree, I love that conversation. So feel free to disagree, agree, give us your ideas and feedback, and because we want this to be interactive. So I won't go through this a lot. We're really just going to do some welcome introductions, thinking about what's ahead. Talk about these new exhibitor and sponsor expectation. Our section, we had a blast thinking about what's hot, what's not, thinking about this, building a sense of community, other tools for your kit. And we've also tried to layer in a lot of what we promised is a lot of data that we're going to kind of layer in through things. So there's not one slide with a ton of data, but a lot of it really has to do with what's sprinkled throughout. So I don't want to spend a ton of time because usually I'm the one yakking at these things. I have a guest, so I will try to move past me as quickly as possible. Many of you, I see lots of familiar faces. It's great to see you back, and lots of new faces. Everyone asks me, like, Rich, what the heck is a wonk? It's a person who likes to think about something and spends a great amount of time doing it. And that's me and trade shows and events and conferences. I mean, the Urban Dictionary definition defines it as an expert in the field, typically someone who is fairly young and very intelligent. And if my hair and waistline don't indicate, I am far from young and I'm far from very intelligent. So we're going to stick with the Cambridge Dictionary definition of what the heck is a wonk. All right, so both Marlis and I want to connect with you. I'm going to move on more to her screen, but if you didn't know, it's a cool feature in LinkedIn. You go fire up the LinkedIn app, and you basically scan that QR code and we'll connect on LinkedIn. So when we're sharing out cool content, other things, sometimes when Marlis is a guest and I'm a guest, or new things that she's pushing out, these are great opportunities to see content that we're putting on. But I would be remiss just not to tell you, obviously, Personify is putting this on, and A to Z is really known as the trade show and event management solution. From booth sales, boosting revenue, better engaging attendees. We work with over 1,000 trade shows, conferences, and associations around the globe. I think most people don't realize we bought a registration company. Finally, we have one. So event regs, check-in and badge printing, attendance tracking, and leave retrieval systems. And across the Personify portfolio, we've got AMS, LMS, all kinds of AMS products for associations. So that's the commercial, and I'll keep moving on, but I'd be remiss not to tell you of all the things that we offer. So now the real reason you came is Marlis. I am super excited. She's got her QR code down there, and she's got like a way cool QR code. So that'll take you to somewhere really cool. But let me give introductions and I welcome her. What I love about Marlis is we've been friends for a long, long time, and she brings that fresh perspective because she's been an exhibitor and an event organizer. I kind of like that's the best sides of the booth. You know, she's been on both sides, and she really works to provide techniques to put things into action immediately. And I think that's the most important and why we get so many folks that show up. We're always trying to give you things to go back to your teams and your organizations to say, hey, what can we do to that? So we're going to pose some really big questions today. Over the past 2 decades, she has helped thousands of trade show exhibitors gather more qualified leads, outshine their competition, and maximizing their exhibiting investment. And more importantly, I have my own personal signed copy right here. She's written the 2nd edition of Build a Better Trade Show Image and Exhibit Design That Works. available on Amazon. We'll talk about other ways to get a hold of this great book. She's the founder of Exhibitor Marketer Cafe, Exhibitor Marketers Academy, and an online education community is what that is for exhibitors. And obviously, she spends a ton of time out speaking, publications, and she hosts the Tradeshow Insights blog and podcast. Those 6 paragraphs don't do you justice, Marlis, but welcome. So before I go on, thank you for joining me today. So
thanks, Rich. It's always fun to be here with you.
Well, and that was the thing in preparation. We realized for the hours and hours we've spoken, we probably don't need slides and we could have a conversation, but I know people like some slides. So again, we're going to front load the presentation with some slides and then really make the back half interactive. But we want to make the front as interactive too. So what is the excitement thing here is there is a bonus. So part of you, like the Scotts and the Cheryl and Terry, people that are interacting, think about why you want to interact with us. One of them is so we can give you a book. So we'll draw randomly from people that have shown up today and people who get extra entries because they ask or engage, because I would love to send you a couple folks copies of this book, because it is, if you can't tell, mine is marked up, earmarked, eardogged, like all kinds of things, because I think it's a great resource for folks that help organize trade shows. So,
and what Rich is not telling you is he actually wrote the foreword for the book as well.
Yes, so yes, I did. It is fun to see yourself at Amazon. I had the joy, and thank you for letting me write that. So, all right, let's talk about your book a little bit. I mean, we have a lot of association organizers, independent show organizers. Tell us what got you to write this book, the second edition. Tell us a little more, then we'll get into the content.
Well, just real quick, the reason I wrote it initially, way back years ago, was that I wanted a manual. Basically, I wanted it to be the manual or the handbook that I wish I would have had as a new exhibitor that walked through everything. So I created it as a manual that walks you through what to do before, like setting goals and pre-planning, how to design the exhibit, how to market and promote before, which is a piece that a lot of exhibitors miss or skip. And then what to do in the booth, with the booth staff and the attractions and all those kinds of things. And then what to do after, because that's where most exhibitors drop the ball, is what to do after the show. So, like I said, I wrote it years ago and really had never thought about doing a second edition, but, shortly before the pandemic, people started kind of asking, it's like, would I think about doing an update? And then, the more requests I got, and then if I'd been really smart, I would have started like during lockdown, but instead I started in late 21. I started right as things opened up again. I started working on a second edition. So just in February, the second edition came out. So, this time there's lots. I kept a lot of the really great examples from the first edition, but I also layered in a lot of, even some things that I just discovered like in November or December. So some of the examples are really fresh and really new. And, I wanted it to be something that is more updated, but also something that can be more evergreen. So I tried to write it in a way that it's, hopefully won't get dated too quickly.
Cool. Well, that's a great overview. And I think some folks, don't panic if you don't have exhibitors at your show. I know we have some folks that just have education. We're going to cover those things and talk about sponsors as well. So I just want to cover that. We've used the word exhibitor a lot, but I want to make sure that everyone knows that we've got that. So I mentioned it, but we want this to be interactive. So again, the chat is open and some of you have already been chatting. So again, extra reasons so we can send you, randomly draw you, but send you a book. Talk with others. Again, as we go through content, we'd love to hear it. So let's get started. Marlis, what was 2022 in a lot of ways to you? What did it really represent in events, in your opinion?
2022 was like open the floodgates. I mean, it was like everybody was racing to come back together, and it was like this huge exuberance.
So what do we caution people about doing?
Yeah, well, 2022 is not necessarily every year going forward. I mean, it was a lot of exuberance. It was a lot of everybody couldn't wait to get back together, but we've got budget cuts, we've got slim down staffing. We've got, a lot of other issues. So it's not necessarily going to be, 2022 does not mean 2023 or 2025 or.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's why, we're here to make sure that 2023 is not the hangover. So we're hopefully going to cover some topics that I think it is. 2023 is going to be a challenging year. We saw shows, that had great years. I mean, numbers along the pandemic, pre-pandemic numbers. I think the uphill climb is here for show and event organizers and conference organizers as they think about I'm not saying that 2022 was easy by any stretch, but I think when we look at 2023, we got to start to do that. Why? Because our exhibitors and sponsors want more, right? Show me the attendees, Scott coming out, our exhibitors were excited to get back, broke exhibit and sponsorship records, but attendance was down. I attribute that the travel budgets were set in 2021. Great point, Scott. And we're back to pre-COVID numbers. Yeah. So I think, go ahead, Marlis.
Well, I was just going to say, seeing the photo there, show me the money is also still a part of it because, the exhibitors want the ROI, but the attendees do too. So, everybody's wanting to make sure, because budgets are tight, they want to make sure that they're spending their money to come to a conference or come to a trade show that's really going to pay off for them.
So we want to start off with a little bit of data and understanding what they're expecting you. And some of this is the great research we did just 2 months ago, really Derry did, and really reaching out to exhibitors large and small. And won't go into the validity of the survey, but it was really good looking at exhibitors and sponsors. And ironically, what do they say they expect you as an organizer to do? You got to continually attract attendees through better experiences. And what was most interesting to us was the data that they're looking at this new millennial market, which is scary. I think we give millennials a hard time. Apologies to any millennials on here. I think we give you a hard time, but that is the new buying demographic, right? They're that 27 to 42-year-old, and they're the largest population in the US now at 72 million people. So, you think about, how do we start targeting that? They're expecting not only for you to deliver on that, but you to think about how are you attracting those younger audiences. And Derry put that in the chat there if you want to access that. We did a whole webinar and there's a big report on that, but just want to cover that there. Another thing we found too is that this was surprising to me was that 84% of exhibitors believe that education is the critical driver for event attendance. I mean, most exhibitors think it's because of their swag and because they show up, right? They're realizing that, part of what you need to do is also deliver content. But where, and we'll get to this, blurring those lines between the show floor and education is becoming more vital. I know for some folks, especially in the medical field, you can't do that. But this whole section is about what they expect you to do. How that deals with reality, we'll get to that. And Marlis?
Yeah, and the whole thing is, it's not necessarily, and I've said this forever, but it's not necessarily more attendees, it's better qualified attendees. And just going back to last week at Exhibitor Live, that was one thing, that the show floor was smaller, the attendance was definitely smaller. But I was hearing, the thing that I heard across the board from both attendees and exhibitors was better quality conversations. I mean, people were having in-depth conversations, and the attendees were very highly qualified. So, that's the whole thing of, it's got to be better quality attendees, not just massive, because actually for an exhibitor, it's harder for them when they've got, 500 people coming through and only 100 of those are really qualified, rather than when they've got a smaller audience, but it's really a highly qualified audience. So don't necessarily look at it as, and I know for years shows have been like, we got to get more people. And it's not necessarily more, it's how can you get the best quality, and how can you get, how can you help facilitate those conversations and that matchmaking between exhibitors and attendees?
We've had some great points. Some folks is asking about volume discounts for the book. So make sure, yes, I know Marlis will work out a deal with you there. It is a great resource tool. And I want to go back to Terry made a comment. She said, and we'll talk about this. It's attendees are wanting a little bit more of both in-person connection, but access to resources and recordings afterwards. So Terry, you're like 3 slides ahead, which I love. That's it. I totally agree. And Marlis and I agree on that. Yeah, connection and experience is key for sure. I mean, that's really it. Like, I think, exhibitors are saying, look, you've got to deliver on value, because if you're delivering, you're going to attract the attendees, right?
Yeah, and the whole thing is that exhibitors they have to step up their game, doing what they used to do back in 2019 and just showing up and handing out swag. I mean, again, we're not picking on the swag, but if that's what they thought was what I call the field of dreams mentality, if they just show up and people magically come, they've got to work a little harder. Well, not a little harder. They've got to work a lot harder, and they've got to be delivering value, or attendees aren't going to spend time in their booth.
Yeah, it's a tough time, I think, for show organizers, because their expectations don't always meet reality, and they're saying these things. And I think you and I got talking, and we threw this slide in here because it's one of my favorites. Is when you look at this. So this is a really big exhibit hall, and if you look in the back, there's a 10 by 10 near the men's restroom in the back of the hall, which you would most of the time say is probably a pretty not ideal location. But what this shows is the darker intensity of the color is how many lead scans. And you got this little 10 by 10, and even some 10 by 10s even on the back wall of G there, performing better, if not blowing out some of these bigger booths. So it's not always the size of the booth, right? So I mean, it's a two-way street, right?
Well, and classic example, just last week, one of the exhibitors that I talked to, she told me that she met her leads goal. Like I said, attendance was down, but she met her leads goal on day 1, and she was in a 10 by 10. But she knows what she's doing. She did pre-show marketing. She incentivized people to come to her booth. They had a reason to come, and she knows how to staff her booth. She and her team, they were doing a great job in the booth, and it really showed. And so she was thrilled, even though attendance was down. So, I always say it doesn't matter where you are on the show floor. It doesn't matter how big or small your booth. It's all in following the strategies of what needs to happen in order to draw in the right attendees.
There are some great questions I'm going to save, or we're never going to get through this. I will get to you. There's the comments. I love it. This is one of my favorite cartoons. I feel like, exhibitors. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss your exhibit? Yeah, and I love, and again, too, feel free to share ideas as we get to them. So let's move on to attendees a minute. I mean, I feel like just as much as the expectation on exhibitors, I feel like attendees are suddenly saying, hey, what is the compelling reason to come? What's the return on my time, my investment? What is your why? I mean, I always tell this story, and Kathy from IEEE gave me a hard time. I said, I love IEEE. I always used to go to the chapter meetups. And it took me, Kathy Breeden pushing me to go to one. And I'm like every attendee again. Like, what is the reason? Show me the value. And I think more and more attendees are saying, this is my new office. I used to always work in an office. Like, you got to get me to wear pants and shoes. And that's tough. And to leave this house and to drive to DC. So, and that's a true story.
Well, and like you said, a lot of these people that are coming now, not necessarily the millennials, but now moving into the Gen Zs, you've got people that are brand new. They don't know anything about the industry. They don't know anything about your show. They're coming, and especially if you're dealing with an introvert, you've got somebody who works from home. They've never been involved in the industry. They don't know anybody, and they're coming to this big event and they have no clue. So really mapping that attendee journey and helping them feel comfortable and helping them feeling not so overwhelmed, I think is so important.
But it's interesting to hear David and folks saying, I mean, they're really upping how often they're doing things and keeping it engaging. And I love people are commenting back. This is I love when you get a bunch of event props, we can solve the world, right? All right, last one here is, we joke about it, but I was telling Marlis this, that I was recently visiting somebody and I met a lot of new trade show folks, younger audiences. And it was a weird moment to me when I was like, oh, are you remote? Are you hybrid? What kind of shows have you been to? And we are now dealing with people making decisions in the trade show business that have never worked for a company in an office or have never been to a show or your show. And so, they now are looking to events to come to network because they haven't been to an office space. And I think that's a really unique shift in time now that we're dealing with this. And we don't build enough of this last one, and we'll talk about that a little more. I mean, we talk a lot about mapping the attendee journeys, but Marlis, I know you do a lot of audits and you look at what does this really mean to folks when we say the attendee or the exhibitor journey? You can almost use this sort of interchangeably.
Well, and one of the things I do is a lot of times, I go and check out a website, whether I'm a show's website, whether I'm doing that as an audit for that particular show and looking at it from their audience's perspective, or just going in, like, I'm working with an exhibitor client and they want me to go, help them with whatever show they're exhibiting at. So I look at a lot of show websites. It amazes me how some of them fail so miserably in communicating, because, like, I was looking at one just the other day and I couldn't even find how to get the information of what it costs to get a booth space, because everything, there was no like prospectus to download. There was no, no detailed data sheets, whatever. It was all just, oh, contact us. Oh, contact us. And it's like, I'd kind of, I was working with a small exhibitor, and it's like, I'd kind of like to have an idea if this is a show that my client, what they're looking at as far as what that investment would be, So it's things like that. It's like, just basic information that's missing on the website. Communicating with both attendees and exhibitors. And then on the flip side, I worked with an exhibitor a small exhibitor who was going to a big show for the first time. And so I went and checked that show out, and oh my goodness, they had like all of these wonderful promotional tools available for their exhibitors, a lot of which were even free. So I was like, I told her, I was like, you have no idea how lucky you are. This is a great show to be involved with, because they get it and they're really providing a lot of tools for their exhibitors to use to connect with the attendees ahead of time. So, it's just, there's so many things that don't have to be hugely expensive or hugely complicated to layer in to help build that experience, as you're ramping up to your show for both attendees and exhibitors.
Well, and I know a lot of association folks are on, and I want to include a little more data. And when we look at, we did a survey last year looking at why do people actively engage in association. It's broken down here by, generation. And I want to highlight again that millennial group. When you look at, having a chance to learn career skills or certifications, well, guess what a lot of us do at trade shows? That's an opportunity to get those. Being able to network with others in person. That millennial group, again, they're coming back to trade shows. There's some SEER data talking about who is coming back, and we want to get that group there. Being able to network with others on digital platforms and communities, where again, we're seeing that, I've seen some of you talk about the digital and the in-person. I think we have to connect that. That to me is the definition now of hybrid events. We are going to connect these audiences, and these younger audiences, that's what they know. And then again, socialize with those with common interests. That goes back to networking. So when you look at that millennial, and I know every audience and every association sort of struggling now, how do we attract these younger audiences? Your exhibitors want them, and making sure that you deliver on these types of experiences, why they're going to engage in your associations. And I know, Marlis, you and I were talking about this. You're seeing some even bundle as part of the event membership, right?
Well, exactly, because exhibitors, let's just be honest, exhibitors don't care who's a member and who's not. They just want quality attendees. And so for you as the show organizer, if you're bringing in non-members, it's definitely an advantage for you and for the exhibitors, because for you, you can charge more for the non-members to come. You can also introduce them to how great your association is. You can even bundle in. So like if they pay to attend the expo, the conference, then they get a 1-year membership bundled in. So I've seen that handled that way as well. So, there's a lot of advantages to marketing to people outside your membership.
Yeah, great point. I love your question, Mary, and I love David's response. But we'll get to some of these. Marla, she'll love some of these questions. I feel we got to keep moving, and we're never getting.
Yeah, they're flying so fast I can't even follow them all.
But we do want to say that, look, I think this year, and for a couple of years, your audiences are going to be different again. Who is coming back are going to be at different rates. I mean, they are going to be younger. They're going to be less loyal to your industry. I joke. Many of you, a lot of you folks in here know me. When we lost our person that did all of our trade shows and events for the entire company, they said, hey, who knows trade shows and events? And they came to this guy. But now I'm an exhibitor again in terms of other events I have no history or understanding of. So I'm back. I know how to exhibit, but I don't know their show. I don't know that we've gone. And so thinking about me is another great piece. All right. So what's hot? What's hot for exhibitors? This was really interesting. Visibility over leads. And I think that's a shift because it was always leads. And when we did our survey, it was talking about visibility and brand. And so I think I put these little dollar signs because we talk about areas where you can generate revenue. I think you have to start to shift your message a little bit that, like, hey, trade shows are more than just leads. It's engaging with your contacts, your prospects, your current clients, your people that are learning about your new products and services because they've never seen your booth, and starting to quantify other metrics in a trade show is going to be really important, because I think lead scans is one KPI. I think we need to look at more of them, because more people and more CFOs are saying, holy crap, events are expensive and travel's getting expensive. What are we getting out of it? And I think it's, as show organizers, our job to teach exhibitors, hey, you can't just measure leads as an indicator, right?
Well, and I'll say too that if exhibitors are looking for visibility, that's a great opportunity to sell them into a sponsorship. Match them up with a sponsorship that's going to give them additional visibility.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, and then we talked a little bit about it, but integrated into educational offerings. They are often thought leaders. They can provide you great thought leadership. I know it's always a challenge. Everyone's panicked about pitches and things like that. But when you look at that blurring of those educational lines, exhibitors want to be involved. And so it's hot for them to say, hey, you know what? We have some of the brightest minds that work for our company across all of who we service in your association or at your event. Why aren't we more involved in education?
Yeah, and I saw a comment earlier about the product theaters. That's a great thing to incorporate. I mean, they had that last week at Exhibitor Live, where there was a TED style stage on the show floor where different exhibitors were giving presentations throughout the day. So.
Well, and I think there's a shift. I mean, we keep saying exhibitors and sponsors, but to me, there's a shift in saying, I want to be an industry partner. I want to connect with your community. I mean, half of our survey audience said that. Like, look, hey, we don't just want to be at your event, and stop treating us as, I mean, we've all been on the elevator when someone's like, oh, what company are you, who are you here with? And they realize you're an exhibitor, and then they hit the next 6 floors just to get off the elevator, because we tend to treat sometimes exhibitors as these like separate audience. Treat them as industry partners. That's what they do. That's what they want, and engage them throughout the year, because that's where you're going to generate revenue, is when you can incorporate them into other activities, other webinars, there's other digital experiences, or say, hey, we're going to connect you and deliver on in person.
Especially as you're dealing with those Gen Zs, because they are not just a in real life audience. I mean, they're living a lot of their life on digital. And so if you're missing that all those digital opportunities, you're missing out on ways to connect with that younger audience.
Scott, I'm going to call that, it's a great line. He says, sometimes we just send, exhibitors send sales staff, and they don't get that salespeople think attendees want to come to their booth, pen in hand, and ready to sign a contract. You're right. That is absolutely right. Well, I'm going to let you hit this last bullet point, because this is, we've had a lot of questions about, this is what you love to do and spend a lot of time doing, but exhibitor education is hot, because again, even me, I need education for all these new shows that I'm going to, because I don't know a thing about chambers, to give you an example.
Well, and the whole thing is, and I saw that comment before, that a lot of times the person who is in charge of organizing the exhibit is not who goes to staff the booth, and the people that are sent to staff the booth Well, like I talked to somebody last week and she's like, I've only been with the company for 2 weeks. She's like, I can't answer all the questions because I don't know things yet. So there's a lot of education. And, sometimes I get the pushback. I actually, several years ago, I wrote what I call the Exhibitor Education Manifesto. So if you connect with me, I'll hook you up so you can get a copy of that. But I wrote that because I felt like I had to define what is exhibitor education. It's not sales training. I mean, that's part of it, teaching people, how to actually sell in the booth. But, if you've got salespeople in the booth, honestly, that's not necessarily sometimes the best people to have in the booth. Sometimes the best people in the booth are the I&D experts, or the I&D, the R&D, research and development people, the customer service people. Those kind of people are better in the booth because they can really answer and explain things better to the attendees. But a lot of exhibitor education comes down to what I call, booth staff behavior, and what I call the 10 commandments of things that I see all the time. I even saw last week, people sitting in their booth, maybe sitting in a huddle talking to each other rather than to the attendees, or they're eating, or they're on their cell phone. So there's so many things that need to be included in exhibitor education, but it also needs to happen way in advance. There needs to be things, educating them just on things like, move in and some of the logistics training and stuff like that, and helping them. If you do a good job of educating your exhibitors ahead of time, and especially doing it in like a broadcast manner of doing a webinar or doing, e-blasts or whatever, then you're hopefully not going to have to do as much hand holding with all the individual questions. You'll still have some of that because, as Rich and I always laugh, exhibitors don't read, but
Well, and Catherine asked a great question too. And again, there's so many questions, like we'll save some to the end. But I mean, she's talking about quantifying measures. And I feel like, Catherine, you and I need to talk afterwards because I'm doing the same thing right now. But I think it's starting to show people templates of like, well, don't just measure leads. It's how many appointments did you schedule? How many clients did you visit? What was the average, revenue of that client you visited? Trying to think about, can you give them other metrics to measure because they're not doing it? I mean, again, we've had to think about it. So Catherine, follow up with me. We'll talk. I want to wrap up and say, I think we also forget, and especially a lot of smaller associations, your smaller exhibitors compared to your larger ones, they need you more than ever because they're spending probably the largest dollar amount. They need the most help, the most training, and the guy or the gal that you're talking to is probably the owner, the CFO, the CMO, and whatever. But as larger exhibitors go, I think when we look at budget concerns, sustainability, and other factors, look, Marlis and I talk about sort of this sort of centerpiece of connections. I mean, you still can't fly to every client, but you can fly to a trade show and meet every client at a trade show. And we talk long-term sustainability in the business. Those are things that exhibitors are going to start realizing, like, hey, I should go to a trade show instead of flying to all these places.
And those small exhibitors, they are really the ones saying, show me the money, because the big exhibitors are the ones that are probably answering that survey that they're looking for visibility. The little exhibitors, they want leads and ROI and sales to come out of it. So they really, they're putting everything on the line for they're probably only doing one big show. They don't go to 10 or 12 shows a year. They're going to this one big show. They've chosen your show. So how are you really going to make it worth their ROI?
Yeah, and Mary said it's hard to train my exhibitors. I got a poll launched. I'll give everybody a second to take that. Hard to train my exhibitors because the person who signs up for the booth is not the person coming, and they can't even tell me who is coming to staff up the booth until the people actually show up. It amazes me. Yeah, Mary, there's a lot of people that invest a lot of money into shows and have a really poor strategy. My line is, hope is not a strategy. Hoping to get leads, hoping to do business, hoping to do anything in a trade show is not a strategy. But you'd be surprised how many exhibitors use hope as their trade show strategy.
Well, and I'll just say too that it never fails, no matter how big or small the show. I've trained with shows of all sizes in all kinds of industries. Typically, whenever we offer exhibitor education, we only have about 25 to 30% of exhibitors that take advantage of it. So you're never going to educate everybody, but the more opportunities you give them, the ones that are just dying for help and just they know that they need help, they will take advantage.
Yeah, I am seeing that more audits, bringing in folks like Marlis and others, and to audit when people it's actually live on the show floor, because then it gets the show organizer out of the tough position, and it's really feedback. And usually the person that's coming back and screaming at the sales team, because I've done a lot of booth sales over the years. It's usually the exhibitor that somebody commented earlier, they're on their phone, they're tuned out. So let me go ahead and end the poll here, and let's share the results. What are you using to educate? E-blasts, personal phone calls. I think they're back in a big way. Social media, webinars, and podcasts. Really interesting. I think that's going to be the new thing is looking at phone calls. I think I hate to say it, it's exhausting, but I think more people need phone calls. All right, so let's switch gears a minute. What's hot in education? Because I think we've been focused on exhibitors and attendees, but exhibitors actually realize education is a main driver of your event. I feel like a lot of this is obvious. It's funny because I even look at, if Janet Spearstad, I interviewed her at Expo this year. She teaches event management at Madison Technical College, and she just keeps saying like 20 minutes is the end of the world now in terms of content and length of content. And you look at all kinds of surveys out there, that's about it now. And that was, we were already edging at 20 minutes before the pandemic, right? So yeah, and I know that's hard when you talk about CEs and credit and things like that, but I see even like more organizations doing like 30 minutes to count for the hour, just creative ways. I mean, there's a reason TED Talks are so popular.
And learners, like you said, learners want conversations. That's a way to keep it more interactive and helping if you've got a longer presentation, not doing the whole talking head thing. I know that's what Rich and I are kind of doing today, is talking at you, but getting people, we've got you involved in the chat, you're adding comments, you're talking back and forth between each other. Learners want conversations, and especially since the last couple of years we've been living our lives online and having a lot of these very involved, engaged online conversations, people want more of that now, even in person event. So how can you build in more conversational, more participatory sessions into your education?
And if you're not asking in your conference and call for papers, I wrote a sort of a a mini ebook. There is going to put in the chat. I think there's a lot of ways we have to think about education, and I will blast some organizations. I know for some reasons you can't, but it is hard for me. I just got my thing to submit a call for papers to speak about the events business in December. What I think about in May is going to be like here in December is tough. So you're gonna have to think about that. Daryl put that in the chat. It's sort of my take on how you have to think about things differently there. But we've mentioned it: interactive, hands-on, personalizing, doing versus listening, and that's tough for a lot of presenters. I mean, like you said, today we're not the best examples of it, but it's a webinar. But when you think about these sessions, it's hard to ask people like, hey, I know you want to go and stand and present, but can you interact and get engaged and walk out in the audience? And that's something that will be valuable, especially you talk to these younger attendees. That's what's going to engage them.
Well, and one of the most fun sessions I ever got an opportunity to lead at a conference was a field trip. We were in Vegas, and so I did a field trip, an excursion up the strip. And so we went to all these different places, and the whole thing was figuring out because obviously in Vegas there's tons of cool experiences and engaging elements and things. So it was, I called it TSI instead of CSI. So it was trade show investigation. So they were supposed to gather clues of what could they learn from what all the hotels and restaurants and things are doing on the strip that they could take back and use in their own trade show marketing program. And so, and then we gathered together, we broke into teams, and we did, like I said, a field trip, and we broke into teams at each one of the locations. And then we gathered together at the end over dinner, and everybody shared and unpacked what they'd learned. And so, how can you incorporate, and I realize that a field trip is not necessarily something that lends itself to, every type of industry, but how can you get these more hands-on interactive type of presentations involved?
Well, that sort of leads us to the last one. I know South by Southwest isn't always a fair example. I think people say, well, it's South by Southwest. but they do a lot of crowdsourcing their agendas, looking at letting people pick sessions. Look, in no way do the attendees get to pick the final sessions. Of course, show management and the education team and whatever. But when your audiences tell you what's important and give you ideas, that's again, I get to engage before I even get there. And that's what I love about the Southwest. And they don't have it up now because it's just South by Southwest has happened, but it's called Panel Picker. And they get to crowdsource a lot of concepts. And so there again, when you talk about what's hot, it's not always this secret group that reviews behind the scenes. That certainly happens. But then there's also sections that you're going to put up and say, look, we want to know from you. For you to come to our event, tell us what you want to see. Because then again, and that's a real big shift there. But those younger audiences value that experience. So they're more likely to come. And as we said, the more likely to come, the happier they are as exhibitors. And I think a lot of people are not delivering on this in terms of education. And I think this is tough. I think this is a big shift in education.
Well, and I'll just say too, one of the complaints that I hear so often at industry conferences is we see this, from attendees, we see the same topics and the same presenters every year. We want something new. We want to be challenged. We want to hear fresh perspectives. And so, make sure that you're not always just having the same people teaching the same sessions, having, mixing it up and bringing in new things. And I think that crowdsourcing is great because then you can really hear, maybe there'll be a topic that comes up in the crowdsourcing that you're like, wow, we never thought about having a session about that, but we need to find a subject expert that can present on this topic.
Yeah, I'd love to hear in the chat if you guys are trying some new things in terms of education, but we're starting to run thin on time, so I'm going to start to move us up here. We've talked a lot about, but attendees are now realizing that, look, we don't use the word virtual, but we want to connect before, during, and after the event. Like we realize that, wait, it's silly that we only go for these 3 days. There's a lot of people that I didn't get to talk to. There's a lot of speakers that I like to interact with, a lot of other attendees. And when we look at revenue opportunities, thinking about, we're going to talk about communities in general, but they want to connect. And that's what, that's to me where this, again, hybrid concept is going, is like, look, we're interacting digitally. I mean, you talked about it at Exhibitor Live. I feel like there's a lot of people that I know digitally, and then we finally meet up at an event, and it's like, it's this cathartic moment of, oh my goodness, you're a real person. Right? Yeah, I mean, Kimberly just brought up, we're trying to implement education sessions where the exhibitor can showcase their industry knowledge and thought leadership. Yeah, very slow process. But yeah, I mean, this doesn't happen overnight for sure. What about this one? This is a big one, right?
Yeah, and networking. I mean, that was so much of what was happening last week. I mean, for me, day one, especially since, I hadn't been to exhibitors since 2019. So I was reconnecting on day one with people that, I hadn't seen for years. And then also meeting all these new people that I've just been connecting with online. So it was all about the networking. But again, it goes back to giving them a tool so that they're not just, especially if they're attending by themselves, they're not just thrown into this show all by themselves. Give them a way to start that networking online ahead of time.
Go to any networking event and you will see the most comfortable people networking are older. And I'm not being ageist, I'm saying because that's what they've always done. Younger people are like, I've always networked online. Hey, pro tip, look at Courtney. I'm talking about raising revenue in the chat there. So don't miss that. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, there are opportunities to make, same with networking. You can get it sponsored. More exhibitors are looking at, hey, I want to have this type of group at an event. I want to have this title at an event. And there are ways to facilitate networking. And guess what? First-time attendees, I used to have this badge that said I heart first-time attendees because I always looked at they were the future of the industry. And so it was always this conversation point. But so we always sponsored, first-time events because we looked at them as a long-term investment. So that was where we spent our sponsorship dollars. In terms of time is even more valuable. It's been amazing. I'm talking about this more. It's like matchmaking, all this expedited, like, hey, we got a limited time, make it worth my while, right?
Yeah, even things like show floor tours, letting people sign up and then taking them on a guided tour of the show floor so that they, maybe spotlighting new products or something so that they can really see, especially if it's a huge show floor, they could see a cross section in a very short amount of time.
I see hosted buyer coming back, as a way to connect folks and pay for folks there. But the biggest thing, I joked about it earlier, what are those unique experiences that can't be had at home or in the office, which is also maybe the home now? And when you look at those younger audiences, that's the trick. You got to get me out of here and my family and my dog, my elderly dog. Those are the kind of things that you're competing against now. And I will say this, I do a lot of sessions on it, and it's part of my background, but I think we fail at this industry at doing market research about our audiences. I think it's more important to know who your new exhibitors are, who are the new people buying and making decisions, what are their pain points, what are they trying to solve? Because, digging out that 2019 toolkit and playbook is not going to work it, because again, call me, the new guy, and say like, hey, you're coming to this chamber event. I'm like, I don't know chamber executives. I know trade show people. So, all right, so we'll go through this pretty quickly because no one wants to talk about the negative stuff and we're running out of time. All right, I think everyone is probably hopefully relieved by this, and there may be some people that may throw darts at me, but the metaverse is not hot. Why, Marlis? Why?
It's just not, I mean, it's great for gaming, but it's not working out the way that Zuckerberg and others thought it was going to.
If Fortune 500 companies can't figure out the space,
No.
don't rush your show on there, so. Oops, I jumped ahead. Womp womp, everyone's seeing it. Rising costs everywhere. I think it's one of the biggest concerns we saw in the surveys, and I think they're looking to you to help either mitigate that or explain how to do it cheaper, right?
Well, and it's back to ROI. You got to show the value for both the attendees and the exhibitors.
I almost brought up sustainability. I mean, I think we all realize that's an issue, but we're also at a time where it's cheaper to throw a booth away than it is to put it back on a truck because of the gas. I mean, that's frustrating. This was a tough one.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to, I hear this all the time from show organizers that, we don't have enough staff to do all of this. Well, like you were talking earlier, the personal phone calls, we don't have time for that. Well, you've got to figure out ways to, and I have a list of tools on my website of, different tools that can help you to kind of maximize your time and streamline some of your work. But, you've got to find a way to make these things happen.
Outdated databases. Man, everyone's turned over. There's a lot of people that have turned over. I think we tend to assume. It drives me nuts when people are contacting my predecessor who used to do all our events, and I'm like, did you not look at the bounce back? Did you not, how are we 3 weeks out? I didn't even know your event was something we go to. Yeah, I mean, and again, I tell you, this is happening to me because databases are outdated. Like, we're looking back to people that have been part of sponsors and exhibitors, and even on the attendee side, let's just send them the emails because they'll come back. And I think if you're not looking at how to clean your database and work with the sales team and marketing ops and sales ops, you're going to have a hard road ahead. Finally, this is one of my favorite ones. Everyone's talking about ChatGPT. Marlis, what are your thoughts?
Well, right there, strategy over tools. I have said this forever, not just with ChatGPT and AI tools, but everything. Don't get sucked in by all the bells and whistles and all the bright, shiny objects. Focus on what are you wanting to accomplish, and then figure out what's the right tool to make it happen. ChatGPT can be very helpful in certain things, but don't just get caught up in it. I did a podcast interview a couple months ago with Michelle Bruno. So if you go to Tradeshow Insights and check it out, but we talked a lot about how do you use these tools and what are they not good for, figuring it out and making sure that you're making the best investment as far as the tools that you're using, time and money wise.
All right, Kimberly made a comment. Yeah, a lot of folks, we work with a lot of groups that have small teams. Yeah, you have to find the time to do phone calls and outreach. It's not easy. Well done, Kimberly. That is kudos. All right, we're going to talk about creating a sense of community because I'm going to get a couple minutes into questions. We're already down to 9 minutes, but this has been great. You guys, I love the interact. People are solving each other's questions and loving ideas, so that makes me really happy. So we talk a lot about a sense of community, and so we wanted to share our final poll. Let's go back here, building community. Because again, I think there's been a lot of talk, right? We saw it during the pandemic. We thought, okay, well, how do we connect these? And I'll be honest, I know we've got a lot of independent show organizers on as well as associations. I think independent show organizers are much quicker to realize like, hey, we can network. We can connect our community with our digital publications, with print publications, with, online communities, with social groups. But these take effort. And I think that's the challenge. We go back to small staff. It's interesting. to see. But when you look about revenue drivers, your attendees are looking for this, your younger generation is looking for this, and your exhibitors are now saying, I mean, half of those that we surveyed of exhibitors of small to big are saying, no, we want to be a part of your community. And we've had some good examples of how to do that. Well, it's just about split. In the interest of time, I'm going to close the poll, share the results. Interesting, really kind of split across there, using groups on social media, private group platforms, and want to create but haven't yet. So yeah, that is probably about right. I think everyone's just trying to figure out this new frontier, but I think the more you explore that, the more often you can get revenue. So kind of closing out here in this section, but this is the tough part, right, Marlis? Because you're going to have to involve your audiences in event planning design. Everybody's going, whoa, wait a minute. I don't want to involve everybody, but what's your thought on that?
Well, that's where exactly the next point there, have an advisory committee, getting a cross section of your audience involved and getting feedback and input, just like you talked about crowdsourcing your education sessions, finding out what are they looking for and building the community for that.
Wait a minute, we have to do it all year?
I have been saying this for years, long before the pandemic. I've been saying, you got it. Why are you focused on 1 week out of the year? Build a community that connects throughout the year. Your exhibitors are going to appreciate it. Your sponsors are going to appreciate it because they've got that opportunity to interact throughout the year.
Susan just said she's hoping to launch an exhibitor advisor committee. I will say they used to be bitch sessions is what we used to call those things, but now I think they're actually really providing value. So Susan, keep us posted. Let us know what we can do to help, because it's and sometimes bringing in outside folks really helps too, to talk about things. So again, look, digital is where it's at in a lot of things, and that's not. And I'm gonna pull up the next slide, because everyone feels like, well, of course you're the digital guy, but I think we also forget old school networking is still paramount. Like, you can have all the tools, but it's again, it's driving those digital connections in whatever communities you all were exploring to deliver on the on-site experience. Because I'm finding more and more, again, I love the moment when I connect my digital people in real life. ILR, right? In real, RIRL. I never get that.
IRL.
And again, there's been some ideas in the chat, but yeah, I mean, looking at those revenue sources, because, someone mentioned webinars, tours, you can incentivize these, because, and I will say too, it's nice because in a lot of ways, there are costs with in-person events. So I want to connect with that same audience to do that. I'm going to do a session at ASAE MMCC. I'm not quite done with it. At some point, I'll get to share with this audience. But I think LinkedIn is the next frontier to make a lot of connections in terms of getting new exhibitors and attendees. In our final moments, we have 5 minutes left. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about these tools, because I think a lot of people don't realize they're out there. I serve on the SEER Research Committee. And Marla's shaking her head, because these are really incredibly powerful tools. One, we are doing research. We are constantly thinking about what you want to know, both, because I think we're all need data. Like, I've hopefully given you a bunch of different, data points today to take back and take action on these. But SEER does, really massive amounts of research to give you that. The reports are awesome. They've got a forecasting subscription for B2B events. It's pretty amazing there. I love SEER. Yeah, y'all do a great job. Thank you. The event performance analyzer. If you haven't played with this cool tool, I'm a data guy. I geek out on that stuff. It's uploading a lot of your data, but looking at performance against the industry and even within your verticals. And you can get, there's a free service and there's a paid service where you can really dig in and deep. But if you're not providing this data to SEER and getting some of the tools out of it, you're missing that. And then events. SEER webinars and SEER Predict in DC. I mean, I geeked out last year at SEER Predict. We'll be there again this year. But these are some of the tools that, I just want to add to your toolkit. There's the website if you don't already have that there. Holy smokes, Marlis, I don't know how we did it. We have 4 minutes, but I would love to take a couple.
Well, we did start a few minutes late. So.
That's right, we did. But I want to take a couple minutes. Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Marlis. But if you want to throw a couple quick questions to throw in, we've had so many as everyone's furiously typing. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that, I think there's a lot of talk about educating that new exhibitor. Where do you start? Where do you start that? Especially for like, Susan, who just is starting one, give her some tips.
Well, the biggest thing, what I think is important is to do a special training just for your new exhibitors. Do a first time exhibitor webinar. Yeah, the ones like Rich that don't know about a chamber expo, helping them, even if they're not necessarily new, like Rich, they're not new in general, but they're new to your show. So giving them some kind of a exhibitor orientation and walking them through some of the finer points. And sometimes it really takes stepping back and looking at your show with a fresh perspective, because you've been doing this for years, but looking at it as how a new exhibitor would see what are the points where they would be confused or feel lost, and where are they struggling, what do they want to find help with, and then walking them through some of those things.
Oh, that was even interesting on our even sustainability. We had a lot of people say, I don't even know where to get started. I know I'm supposed to be more sustainable, but I don't even know, where to get started. Yeah, there's a lot of jokes about exhibitors don't read. You're right. You have to kind of, that's where it's sometimes old school picking up the phone webinars and really trying to incentivize them, to contact. Well, one of the questions that came in too in advance was, and I think a great one is, how do we train attendees to realize the show floor is this really important thing that they should go to if you have exhibitors, sponsors? I mean, yeah, when I say show floor, it can mean 30 tables in a ballroom, or 300 tables, or 300 booths, or 3,000 booths.
Yeah, well, incentivizing them, first of all, giving them a reason to go, providing the time. I mean, I'm still amazed how many shows don't have dedicated show floor time. The show floor is constantly competing with education sessions or, lunch or something else, instead of having, here are 3 hours or whatever time you want to block off, where it is uncompeting show floor. So people aren't divided. I mean, not that you're still not going to have some people that don't go to the show floor. Maybe they're going to take that time to go back to their room and catch up on their email or whatever. You can't make them go, but giving them time where they feel like they can actually be on the show floor and not, racing between sessions and trying to hit 2 booths in between something else.
Well, as we wrap up, again, Marlis, congratulations on the latest book. Like I said, we are going to randomly draw, and thank you for everybody. There's been some great contributors that have really made, and I couldn't keep up with all of it. And again, I want to show the last slide, or we'll send out our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. I know all of us love to talk this. Hopefully we've given you some resources, a lot to think about. Marlis, again, we knew an hour would go like that, but thank you for being my guest. Hopefully we've given people a lot to think about, and I loved all the conversations because this is about you all. So.
Well, and I just want to say, if we didn't get to your question, which I know we didn't get to very many, reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to answer. Also, I just wanted to say, since we've been talking about community, I'm in the process of rebuilding the Exhibit Marketers Cafe community. And so if you scan that QR code earlier, it takes you to my bio page. So you'll see more about the book, and you'll have a link to my LinkedIn profile, but there's also a banner on there about the community. So please go sign up for that. I call it's like the Netflix of exhibitor education.
So Susan, that's especially for you too, as you get this exhibitor committee coming up. I feel like Susan, I feel like we want to help you too. So thanks to everybody. Yes. Have a great day. Stay tuned for future events. Love seeing everybody. Thank you, Daria, for all your hard work, and we'll see everybody soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.